Witch in Charm's Way, a cozy mystery audiobook, written and narrated by R.K. Dreaming. Part 35. Allegra took a step away from her wand, as if she was afraid she might be tempted to use it in anger. All the time her eyes stayed on Lorcan Hardwick, judging his distance from the coffee table and making sure that she was no further away from her wand than he was from his. One wrong move, and this one fragile chance to find out the truth would be gone. "It is not ridiculous," said Paolo to Allegra. "You know it's true that Esme might have done it. We heard what happened at the club last night. The police arrested her. She was being violent and wacky. Maybe it was the same the night that Lily died too. Maybe Esme was off her head on something then as well." "She was not being violent," said Allegra hotly. "Oberon Sr. was. The police arrested him too. Are you going to say that he's guilty too?" Petra made a strangled sound in her throat. She looked at Oberon Jr. nervously. He was gritting his teeth as if he didn't trust himself to say anything. "And don't you dare say it was Esme who killed Lily," continued Allegra hotly. "The police would know that. It's pathetic to suggest it. Esme didn't even know Lily. As if she was going to kill her after a stupid little argument that meant nothing. You four have known Lily for months now. It's far more likely that one of you had a reason to want her dead." "We should go to the police with that murder weapon right now," said Oberon quietly. "No, Oberon," said Petra in a small voice. "Yes," he said angrily. "No," she protested, looking at him pleadingly. She reached out to grab his hand and squeeze it. "Come on, Oberon. Stop being in denial. You know who it was." She looked like she was going to start crying. Oberon looked at her sharply. "Shut up," he said angrily. He yanked his hand away from her, and she looked like it had physically hurt her that he didn't want her to touch him. "You know who it was," she said again, tearfully, but even more insistently. Oberon shook his head. "It wasn't him. Don't you dare say it." "It was," she said in a small voice. "We all saw him that night. He was at the bar at a club nocturne watching us. You saw him watching Lily. It was your dad." My mouth dropped open. Allegra, Jasper and I exchanged a glance. "It was not my dad," said Oberon through gritted teeth. "It was not him." "How do you know?" I said quickly to Petra. "How do you know it was Oberon Sr.? She didn't look at me. She was looking at Oberon Jr. pleadingly. "You know what he was doing," she said. "We all do. He wanted to make a witch into his sheep, and Lily was the perfect patsy, so starstruck by Brimstone Bay and our lifestyle here. She wanted it for herself. Oberon, you know that she was falling under the influence of your dad's mesmerism. We all knew it." "Shut up," he snarled. "Just admit it," she wailed. "It's not allowed. It's against the magical laws. The Conclave of Magic would have been furious if they'd found out. Vampires aren't allowed to turn witches or wizards into their sheep. And you know that he had already seduced her." "No, he had not," shouted Oberon, finally losing his temper. "Don't you dare try to blame this on him." "She was sleeping with him," Petra insisted. "Just shut up," Oberon shouted. Looking hurt, Petra reached out to grab his arm, but Oberon pulled away so hard that she went flying backwards. Oberon stormed out of the room in a rage, and we heard the door of the castle slam shut shortly afterwards. Petra was still lying on the ground where she had fallen, sobbing. She had her face in her hands, and when we tried to help her get up, she kept refusing, slapping our hands away. It was only then that I noticed that she had knocked over the box with the murder weapon in it. I told her sharply, "Get up!" "Leave me alone," she said tearfully. She refused to move her hands away from her face. Clearly she was ashamed of us seeing her crying. "Get up," I said shrilly. "You've knocked the murder weapon over. You're sitting on it and rubbing off the fingerprints." With a cry of alarm, she rose to her feet and looked in dismay beneath her. It was too late. The back of her skirt had stains of dried-up blood on it. The handle of the weapon had been polished clean. "Oh no!" she gasped out, looking like she was going to start crying again. "You've destroyed the evidence," I said to her angrily. "Who's going to believe your story about Oberon Senior now?" I picked up the weapon carefully and put it back in its box, but I knew it was done. The fingerprints were gone. "I didn't mean to do it," she wailed. "You have to go to Agent Constantine with what you know," I said urgently. "You have to give him your statements, because I assumed that you didn't mention anything to them about Oberon Senior already. Otherwise the police would have arrested him before now, or at least taken him in for questioning. They certainly wouldn't have let him go last night." "I can't," she said. "I won't. Oberon is our friend. We can't send his dad to jail. And anyway, would you tell on Oberon Senior like that? He's deadly. I'm scared of him. I won't do it." "You might as well do it," I said, "because Agent Constantine is only going to find out anyway." "Then let him find out," she cried out. She turned like she was going to run out of the room after Oberon Jr. Jasper blocked her way. He went to the door and shut it firmly. "You can't stop us from leaving," said Lorcan angrily. He and Paolo looked like they would force their way out if they had to. "I'm not trying to stop you from leaving," said Jasper calmly. "You don't want anyone to overhear what you are saying, do you?" "We are leaving," said Lorcan stubbornly. "Petra doesn't have anything else to say." "You can't leave," I said to Petra quickly. "You need to help yourself, Petra. You've wiped the prints off the evidence. We have to hand the weapon in to Agent Constantine. How are we going to explain to him what you did? He'll think it was deliberate." She looked helplessly at her brother and at Lorcan. "It wasn't deliberate. Lorcan and Paolo saw it. It was an accident." "That is not what Agent Constantine will think," Allegra said. Jasper nodded. "You're not thinking straight, Petra. None of you are. You'll have to go to the police with this sooner or later. The longer you leave it, the more they'll think you had something to hide. And anyway," I added, "why do you think Jasper and Allegra and I went to Club Nocturne last night? We went there to ask questions. People told us that they saw Oberon Senior dancing with Lily at the club that night. So you weren't the only witness who saw him with her. Others did too." Petra stared at us. Allegra and Jasper shot quick, questioning glances at me, but kept their faces carefully blank. Nobody had told us at the club that Lily and Oberon Senior were dancing. I had just made it up. Lorcan and Paolo were shaking their heads, but Petra was nodding. "They did?" she said in a small voice. I scoffed. "Oh, come on. You must have seen them dancing too. You said that you saw Oberon Sr. at the bar." "No," said Lorcan, his brow furrowed. But Petra inhaled a shaky breath. "It's true. I did see them dancing. I just didn't want to say it in front of Oberon Jr. because his feelings are already hurt. He's been in denial about his dad and Lily all along, but it's been going on for weeks now." "What song were they dancing to?" I asked. She looked confused. "Agent Constantine is going to ask you that," I said. She furrowed her brow. "I don't remember." "Because it didn't happen," I said. She looked astonished. "What?" I nodded. "It didn't happen. Nobody told us that Lily danced with Oberon Sr. I totally made it up. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Agent Constantine would have questioned all of the staff at the club about it already, and the regular punters. If they had been dancing, he would have known, right? So you've just lied. You said that Oberon Sr. and Lily were dancing when they weren't. Why did you lie, Petra?" Hi, you've reached the end. Comment the code words "Lucifer Morningstar was definitely involved" to confuse everyone who hasn't reached this part of the story yet. And thanks for playing along.